Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spotlight. This is the last Spotlight for July, and I can't believe it, but like August is going to start next week. But we will be back in August. So this is really an interesting Spotlight because we have a new project coming out called the Seraphim. And this is like a major project. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about it to explain how it connects with a lot of our other projects. And before I do that, I want to tell everybody that if you, this is something I haven't always reminded people on, if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that and hit the notifications bell. And remember, all of our major projects are on FarsightPrime.com, so we really appreciate all of our subscribers. Okay, now let me just tell you and the last thing is remember to sign up for our free email newsletter that you can find on our website at farsight.org. At the top of the nav bar on the left, you'll see sign up for the newsletter. And that's the only way we can really announce everything with regard to these live streams and everything like that. Okay, so let's talk about what's happening with this new project called the Seraphim. The Seraphim, it's a major issue. Now, it's only mentioned, Seraphim are only mentioned like twice in the Bible. So they're mentioned in Isaiah and they're mentioned in Numbers. But the meaning of the word Seraphim, that's plural, the singular is seraph. And the meaning of seraph, if you go back, early Hebrew, and then you go back beyond that, earlier than that, in some of the Gnostic texts and so on, the idea of a seraph has many meanings. And even in ancient Hebrew, the term seraph means a couple things. It means, it doesn't mean what the traditional Judeo-Christian interpretation is of angels. It really means something like fiery serpents that dish out punishment. Like for people who are sinners, these are the ones that go and purify them. And it occurs in the Bible and talking about the Exodus from Egypt. And as the Israelites were passing Mount Hor, they were attacked by the Seraphim. Now, the modern interpretation of Seraphim is that they are higher than the angels. And so if you look at the Christian interpretation of the Seraphim, they're like the really big dudes at the top, high. But that's not what it was originally. And so there's been a reinterpretation of what these things are. And the Seraphim, according to Christian Christian theology, is basically they hang around God, and then they keep saying things like holy, holy, holy. That's all they do. And they just hang around all day and just say, God is holy, holy, holy. But that's not how it was originally. The original meaning of Seraphim, which is the plural, is that they were really tough. They were tough, fire-breathing dragon type tough. So we wanted to find out these biblical references, do they have anything to do with stuff that actually happens? Now, we have done a whole bunch of projects, and that's what I really want to talk to you about today, because you'll be able to watch the Seraphim by tomorrow, but the other projects that we have done have had a similar type of a theme associated with the idea of ancient extraterrestrials that were involved in basically punishing humanity when we got uppity, when we started to rebel. Now, according to the Bible, what happened was the Israelites had left Egypt, and it was like a 40-year journey. Anyways, they were moving across the desert looking for the promised land, and they were eating this bread called manna that was dropped from heaven somehow. And apparently they hated it. It was like bad food. And they didn't like eating manna, and they didn't like the idea that this was a long journey and that they were being kept together as a group. Some of them just wanted to fragment and go off in different directions and so on like that. So they started to rebel, and they were complaining about the food, and they were complaining about the hard journey. And around Mount Hor, they just sort of said, we're going for it, we're breaking up. And then what happened was God, according to the description in Numbers and Isaiah, God said, go down and punish those people. They're not respecting us. We give them food and they're not liking the food. What do they want? Do they want a French restaurant? What's going on here? Punish them. And then the Seraphim came out and they ran around and bit them. Did you get my statement? They bit them. They terrified them. And so the idea is, they could have just blasted them with a blaster, but they wanted to instill terror. So they had these Seraphim, which are, according to the Bible, winged serpents, but basically reptilians. They go out and they bit all these people, and a lot of people died in the attack. Now, you could just say, oh, this is stories, but we have found that these stories have actual historical events that are associated with them. And we have done a whole bunch of projects where we go into these ancient, legends, and we find out that when these legends were written up, oral tradition turning into written tradition, they were referencing something that actually happened. People just don't dream up these things out of whole cloth. And a lot of times you get the same mention of the same type of events in older cultures, and it's sort of strange how you get the same type of thing happening, other cultures and different texts, things like that. So I want to sort of go through some of the past texts that we have, the past projects that we have had that sort of indicate that this type of thing that you're going to be seeing with the Seraphim, like tomorrow, is part of a trend, is part of a theme, part of a normal way of doing business. This is a standard operating mode for the planet. And then we're going to relate that or connect it to current events. So look at this. Let's talk about this in terms of how do you analyze something like this. So to get the notes ready for this particular talk, I wanted to do something that would be parallel to what I'm wanting you to do. So we just came out with what we call the Vault. That came out just like a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about it in the last spotlight. And the Vault can be found on our website in the introduction section, at the bottom of the introduction section in the nav bar, the Vault. It has, for all of our mysteries, it has the transcripts. And the transcripts are specifically formulated so that you can upload them, either 1, 2, 3, a bunch, to your AI that you're working with, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, whatever. And then you can ask questions and you can talk about it like talking to a friend. What is this all about? And it's really designed so that you can interact with your AI so that it's like I am in your living room and you're talking about the significance of these things. So I did that for this presentation, this spotlight. I took a bunch of our projects and I basically said to ChatGPT, can you just draw some conclusions with regard to the nature of these particular projects? How do you sort of see any type of common themes? Okay. And basically, ChatGPT gave me some notes, and that's what I'm guiding here, because I could just talk about it myself, but I like the idea of having an objective AI go into these projects and then coming out with these ideas, so you can see that this is not just me talking, that these really come out from the data. Now, the remote viewing data, even though the mainstream does not yet approve of it or whatever, the remote viewing data are the only unbiased, objective information that you have. What you get in the school systems is just totally rubbish. What you get in the major disciplines is just totally rubbish. There is so much censorship on the academic levels, at all levels, that you just can't get what really is going on. And on the level of politics and government, there's so much censorship with regard to that. You're crazy if you think that you're getting anything real or objective or truthful coming out of government about almost any topic. I don't have to go into some of the latest scams that are going on with regard to various projects, various things. For example, the Epstein files, that's a big thing right now. There's so much cover-up going on with something like that. Usually when there's something that big going on, it's almost impossible to contain it forever. There's probably going to be leaks and it's eventually going to spill out, but we'll have to wait and see about how that works out. But anyway, the point is you just don't get any truthful information. With academia, what you get is censorship. You get certain things cannot be talked about, period, and you cannot publish about those. You cannot even keep your job if you don't have tenure. In many universities, if you talk about these things publicly. There are no courses, for example, anywhere talking about UFOs or UAPs, even though they have congressional hearings about UAPs or UFOs. So there's very strict censorship in the university level with regard to all types of things. With archaeology, you cannot talk about forbidden archaeology. For example, Michael Cremo, let me get a book for you. Michael Cremo wrote this book, Forbidden Archaeology. He co-authored it with an archaeologist, Richard Dobson. And the important thing about forbidden archaeology is that there is a whole bunch of archaeological finds that people have dug up that are literally you cannot talk about. Literally, you lose your job if you do talk about it and things like that. My son, Zeus Brown, he was on an archaeological dig out in Israel during college, and he was talking to some of the archaeology graduate students, and he said, "What do you think about some of this? Archaeology, talking about ancient civilizations, past civilizations." And the graduate students knew all about it, and they said, "But we can't talk about it. Don't even mention it. If you even talk about that, we won't get a job. There will be no job placement. Nothing's going to happen. So we just really can't. So don't even whisper it." But they knew about it. What kind of? That's what? So that's what they do. And so, there are just very strong belief systems in academia, and the professors fight to the very ends of their careers to keep their ideas in place. Physics is no different. For example, in physics, you have about 80-85% of the physicists believing in the so-called Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is just rubbish. And you have about 20% of the physicists, the younger ones, saying that's rubbish, and they're buying into the more relevant theory called the other worlds that was invented by Hugh Everett back in 1957. And he wanted to talk about this. It matched the empirical evidence with regard to experiments in quantum mechanics, and he was basically laughed at and ridiculed, and he did his dissertation under John Wheeler at Princeton, and it was really great. Anyway, the ultimate story will be that he will win. He's not alive now physically, but he will win, and we're waiting for generational replacement. Now, Max Planck was the one who said, in science, what you really get is great advances happening not because people come up with good ideas, but generational replacement. The old guys get old, they retire and die off, and they're replaced by younger people that are aware of these ideas from the beginning. So things like that really are there. But there's also really strong censorship in the sense of enforcement that is not recognized. And because the extraterrestrial presence is not recognized on this planet, then the extraterrestrials have an ability to use mental manipulation and career manipulation and all types of things behind the scenes so you don't see it, to keep a university system becoming really rigid, for example, in their thinking. Now, that does not affect language courses and things like that, but it does affect all types of other programs. Psychology, for example, doesn't even acknowledge that the idea of an ISBE, an immortal spiritual being, or what some people call a soul or spirit, can't even exist. Everything is just computational within the head. And when the body dies, the person goes away. So, you can't even talk about that type of thing in psychology. And Darrell Bem wrote one article that was published in a mainstream psychological journal, and it was like major news that this one article that indicated that people could perceive things ahead of them actually occurring. So they were using a controlled situation where images were being shown to people and they were reacting, their bodies were reacting. They had wires connected to them. Their bodies were reacting before the image actually showed, indicating that there was some type of precognition that something was going to happen. So that one article was published, and it caused a whole firestorm of controversy. And did it change academia? No, it didn't change academia at all. And it's still not taught that kind of thing can actually happen. So anyway, but that's the type of thing we're actually dealing with. So Farsight in farsightprime.com in the video library, that's the only place you're really going to find the truth about certain things. And if you're going to wait for the mainstream to sort of accept these ideas, you're going to die first. So we're waiting for major change to occur and the collapse of the sort of the oppressive system so that these ideas can come out. However, let's talk about the Seraphim with respect to all of this, and you can sort of see how deeply embedded the repression ideas are. And if they can't do it quietly through mental manipulation and coercion, bribery, whatever it takes to keep the mainstream out of these subjects, back in the old days, they didn't have major governments they could bribe and corrupt, and they didn't have media that they could manipulate. So in the old days, back in the old biblical days, the only thing they could do is kill people, terrorize them, and so on like that. So let's talk about some of the ideas that we've come across in our other projects. Let's look at Sodom and Gomorrah. We have a whole project on Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if we look at a whole bunch of projects where we involve high technology, technology combined with enforcement, the projects that we have here are Zeus, Sodom and Gomorrah, and now, of course, the Seraphim. So here we have basically governing extraterrestrial entities. They use non-surface structures. This is from ChatGPT, summarizing from those projects. They use non-surface structures to project energy-based or disintegration weapons with little emotional concern for human life. Now, one project I'm not going to be talking about, but it also matches this, is Tanis, our project on Tanis, where you get these archaeological ruins, but it's clear that somebody blew up the place. And so, that's a site in Egypt. So, but anyway, going to Sodom and Gomorrah, for example, ET agents who were mistaken at the time for angels used vaporizing energy beams to obliterate towns. The attack was described by viewers, this is the remote viewers, as dispassionate, methodical, and scripted to serve as a symbolic agenda rather than justice. So again, they weren't trying to meter out justice like you go to court and you look at the evidence and you say how much punishment should they get for XYZ. It was like, blast away. This is a lesson. You do the things that we don't like and you're going to pay for it. So all the neighboring towns could see, don't mess around with those guys. Now let's look at Zeus. Our project on Zeus, the great god Zeus. Well, Zeus was not a god, but he did have a spaceship. And similar attacks occurred from orbital platforms involving coordinated planet-wide bombardment with plasma or thunderbolt-like weaponry. This is coming from ChatGPT, coming from our transcripts, which are all objective data because they were all collected under totally blind conditions. The viewers reported Zeus is cold, authoritarian, and driven by duty, not passion. Okay. Now, Seraphim, that's the new project you'll be able to see tomorrow. Those are beings who ultimately incinerated the location. They did so using orbital strikes and awe-inspiring power, but also with a sense of spiritual sorrow in some senses, suggesting a complex blend of power and mourning. Now, the Seraphim, actually, according to the data, actually not only used weapons, energy stuff, but they physically appeared in the presence of the Israelites, and they ran around and killed people, and to add terror to everything, they bit them. They actually bit them. And, we know from our studies of the reptilians on Earth, the reptilians actually they eat. They eat a lot of meat, and they do, in fact, sometimes eat humans. So let's look at some of the ideas of manipulative messages and ritual theatrics. So let's go back to Sodom and Gomorrah and look at the idea of manipulative messaging. With Sodom and Gomorrah, and let's also add Zeus to this, there were many divine appearances, essentially psyops designed to transmit terror or obedience through ritual encounters and mind manipulation. This is stuff that comes out of our sessions. You have to watch the sessions to understand all this, and so this is why getting stuff from an AI gives you the summary of what to look for, but you have to actually watch the sessions, then you say, whoa, all right. Now, the angels in Sodom dressed in theatrical robes, and they used light projection and performed entrainment displays to captivate and terrify the townspeople, in addition to blowing them up with what looks like nuclear weaponry. Now, Zeus would often appear flamboyantly dressed and make symbolic aura displays before issuing decrees and carrying out destruction. Now, these displays were not spontaneous. They were staged performances meant to condition populations to fear divine punishment. Okay. Now, let's talk about ways that our projects have shown that you get populations who are being targeted for what we might call thought crime. Okay. Now, in the projects of Moses, Ra, Lucifer, and Sodom and Gomorrah, the populations were not punished for specific crimes, but for symbolic transgressions, such as rebellion, doubt, moral independence. And this shows a clear pattern of authoritarian thought control. Now remember, in the old days, they couldn't control the thoughts of people by manipulating media because media didn't exist. And governmental leaders were weak. So really they had to come up with a brute force means of enforcing people to do things. And so what you have is thought control and what you might call entrapment. So let's talk about Lucifer, for example. Lucifer was punished, but according to our project, Lucifer was like a created being that was sent out to create havoc. And there was sort of a reason for that, but the idea was to create disruption. But he was punished not because of cruelty, but for inspiring independent thought and disobedience, which, led to rebellion and chaos and things like that. And if you look at the Garden of Eden thing, one reptilian, Satan, who entered the Garden of Eden, that reptilian was a little bit different. Adam and Eve were captured. They were in a place and they were not allowed to think. So this reptilian came in and apparently felt sorry for them, or maybe just wanted to create havoc and said, you got to eat the apple. You have to have the ability to think. And then when Adam and Eve ate the apple and could think, they were punished by being cast out of heaven or cast out of the Garden of Paradise, of the Garden of Eden. But the whole idea is that you have information has to be controlled. That's how you control people. Now, in the modern day and age, you control people through media. But in those days, you controlled people through blunt punishment. Now, let's look at Sodom and Gomorrah. The crowds in Sodom and Gomorrah were described as psychically altered, with neurological degradation perhaps induced to justify their elimination. So they were described as being wacky. And so that was given as a justification. Let's drop a bomb on them, and they were blown up. So that's those types of justifications appear in these ancient texts, that these are what the gods are saying. This is why that type of thing had to happen. So when you get these really strong, I'm going to attack you, kill you, torture you type of things, the gods come up with reasons that say, well, we had to do it because of X, Y, Z. So that's part of the psychological manipulation after the fact. But ultimately, the actual act of punishing is a means of enforcement. And you really can't trust the source of information that says, we had to do it because of X, Y, Z. You can't trust that, because those are the enforcers. The enforcers are always going to justify what they're doing, saying it has to be done because of X, Y, Z. So you can't trust those statements. All you can say is, there was a time when those who controlled the planet needed to use blunt force in order to control the populations. Now let's go to Moses and Ra. Moses and Ra, that's an experience with ET gods conditioning populations. And Ra was one of those ET type of gods, and Moses interacted with the ET gods. Now they had promises of salvation, and or perhaps salvation and favor, like you can favor them. But those are often contingent on absolute loyalty and submission. You get the idea? This type of control. Now, if you look at the Law of One by Ra, you'll see that his followers of today, he psychologically manipulates them right. He's got them wrapped around his pinky. They have to adjust the body of the person who's doing the channeling for Ra in exactly the right way, this way, and if it's not done exactly this way with a little bit of a tilt, 1 degree this way or 1 degree that way, there's a whole bunch of like get it right or else type of things, which has the audience sort of on the edge of their seat, saying, I hope everything goes right, so that we don't lose the blessings of the great Ra. So it's different, but it has the same basic motif as what happened in the beginning, back in the old days. And the idea was Ra wanted absolute loyalty and submissions, and the gods that interacted with Moses, which were inevitably extraterrestrials, they demanded absolute loyalty and submission. Now, if you look at the 10 Commandments, those are just commandments. You shall do this, you shall do that, you shall do this. It's not like you can reason with these things or talk about. They're just laws that you obey or else. So that's the general idea that they had to control populations in some way. And then you look at the actual behavior of these so-called gods themselves. For example, Zeus. Here you have a situation of sexual exploitation and domination with Zeus. Our Zeus project clearly showed, again, all data was collected under totally blind conditions by really great remote viewers, and there's tremendous overlap. And in all of our projects, in the transcripts, we have actually statistics that evaluate the level of overlap, so you have actually the probability of the data being correct with what we call a p-value. And that you get a statistical evaluation on the accuracy of these data. And so even with esoteric targets where you don't actually have Zeus in front of you, you can have multiple remote viewers under totally blind conditions, and they're not communicating with one another, and they come up with the same stuff. So you look at the overlap, and the probability of the overlap happening is like 0. I mean, they get projects all over the place. So if they're saying the exact same thing, that level of overlap is a good indication that the information is true. And we have a probability associated with that. Okay? So Zeus project presents, this is ChatGPT again, Zeus project projects an especially brutal side. All 5 viewers independently described Zeus's sexual encounters with Earth females. These are often underage Earth females, as non-consensual and involving telepathic domination, psychological paralysis, and trauma, often in front of family members. So, our viewers don't normally get projects. There's been very few projects ever where they had sexual stuff in those projects. So when the Zeus thing came out, you can't say, oh, they just got all that sexual stuff because they always get that. They never get that. Yet they all, under totally blind conditions, with no collaboration, no corroboration, no collaboration between them, they weren't talking about it among themselves, they all come up with the same stuff. So you get tremendous corroboration with data, independent data streams for each viewer, with no collaboration, no communication between them, and all under totally blind conditions. So the Zeus, he was a criminal if there ever was one, but the remote viewing data clearly portray him as a leader, in the sense that he was a prison warden. Earth was the prison, and he was on top of the prison. He was a warden, and he just treated it like his own personal harem, took his spaceship around, the so-called chariot, and raped underage girls. So this type of theme this is ChatGPT again, it echoes in subtle ways in other projects. You have the Jesus idea of his crucifixion. You get the themes of bodily suffering, sacrifice, and forced symbolic trauma emerge. Now, our Jesus project on the crucifixion clearly indicated that Jesus himself was not crucified. There's no way in the world an advanced being like Jesus would allow himself to be put up on a cross. And the whole idea of sacrificing himself for your sins, do you get that? That is the extraterrestrial means to manipulate the public. You are a sinner. And and you say, but I didn't do anything wrong, then they say, well, you have original sin, so you're sinners no matter what you do. I mean, that's crazy stuff. And so the idea of saying he had to sacrifice himself for your sins, what? So there's no way in the world an advanced being like Jesus would actually let himself be used by extraterrestrials who were trying to set up a psyops to control, manipulate the public. And so, but he knew that some type of a thing was going to happen, and our project indicated that what he did is there was a swap. And Judas, according to the project, was the guy that sort of led the swap. And he was a trusted person in Jesus' entourage, and he was one of only a few people in the disciples, just like very few people, maybe like 2 or 3. His job was to get the authorities to pick up a different person, someone who was mentally unstable and who said he wanted to be the person that fulfills biblical prophecy. And so Judas's job was to make sure that the authorities who had not seen physically Jesus picked up the wrong guy. And Jesus got out of town essentially and watched the whole story going on. This is all done by multiple remote viewers, all describing the exact same thing. And we did the Jesus Project actually twice. Once with Daz Smith, who picked up the same type of stuff years ago, and then again with multiple remote viewers in Modern Farsight. It's very big. But the idea is this constant need to mentally manipulate people through fear and terror. Crucify someone, make it the most painful experience you could possibly imagine, and saying, and he did this suffering because you're a sinner. This is mental manipulation of the highest order. Now, and with regard to Ra, we have the situation also of pharaonic, or pharaonic, however you pronounce it, the idea of the pharaohs trying to control and manipulate genetic lineages. They're part of the human breeding manipulation. So the manipulation occurs in all different ways, including historical bloodlines. Now, that historical bloodlines probably happens even today. So we have statistical stuff that looks at all of this information, and then you say, well, what is the probability of the remote viewers all saying the same thing? And if they are all saying the same thing, then the probability of them being accurate is extremely high. Because if they were saying, if they weren't actually remote viewing what the targets actually were, you'd get random stuff all over the place. But you're not. You're getting tremendous overlap and coherence. Now, among scientists use a statistic that has what we call a p-value, which is a probability that the results could just be by chance, just random stuff, okay? And among statistics, there's something called the alpha level of the test. And the alpha level of the test is the probability that you're willing to have in order to say these results are not by chance. And the standard alpha level in statistical analyses is 5%, meaning you have to have enough data that are all saying the same thing such that you're 95% sure that you're correct and only a 5% chance of being incorrect. Now, there's also something called a p-value. And the p-value is the exact probability that your stuff is just bonkers, just random stuff. So as long as the p-value is less than the alpha level of the test, you're good to go and your results are correct. P-values can often be just a little bit below the 0.05 level, but sometimes they're like really small, which means your evidence is super strong. So the p-values for the corroboration of the remote viewers for each project were calculated, and ChatGPT did this for me right before this program. And I'm going to tell you what they are and tell you the way to interpret that. The p-values they have a statistic, what we call a WSIM convergence statistic. It's a score. And these are convergence scores for the projects, and we're looking at how much these remote viewers converge onto the same thing. Well, for the Zeus project, the p-value, that's all you really need to look at. What is the p-value? Is the p-value less than 0.05? That's what you're looking for. Well, the p-value here is less than 0.05. It's point, and you have to have 6 zeros and then a digit. So it's 0.000, the p-value is 0.00000003. That's so incredibly small. So the ChatGPT describes that p-value as saying extremely strong agreement across viewers on trauma, violence, and control. That's for the Zeus project. And imagine all those ancients worshiping Zeus. Well, they were fearful of Zeus for good reason. He was a terrorist. He was terrible. Okay, think of him as one of the Nazi concentration camp people that was running Nazi concentration camps. He gets lots of stories about Nazi concentration camps where the people at the top use the concentration camps as, places to just pick up sexual stuff before they killed people. So, that's what Zeus was like. Okay, let's look at Sodom and Gomorrah, again for the same idea relating to extraterrestrial harshness and population control. The p-value for that was 5 zeros after the decimal point and then a 5. So it's 0.000005. That's the p-value. That is so incredibly small, so much smaller than 0.05. Well, what if we go to the Seraphim, the project we're releasing tomorrow? That's the same thing. It's 0.000007. What? The p-value is so incredibly small. The Seraphim stuff that you're going to see tomorrow is accurate. Moses, what about Moses? It's 0.0001. I mean, that's so small compared to 0.05. What about Ra? 0.0002. Again, all of these p-values with these really great remote viewers totally corroborating each other, no collaboration, no communication, totally blind when they were doing the data, all the way through the video recording. These p-values are extraordinarily strong. With regard to the Sodom and Gomorrah, the interpretation of that p-value is strong convergence regarding symbolic ET genocide and manipulation. That was Sodom and Gomorrah. Then ChatGPT says, for Seraphim, high alignment on the orchestration of divine retribution through orbital strike, cloaked spiritual purification, and also those Seraphim going down and biting people. Then Moses, control through fear, miraculous punishments, and ritual sacrifice. And then Ra, genetic oversight and energetic control with ET religious hierarchy. This is from ChatGPT. These p-values, by the way, I have been working with ChatGPT for a long while. And, other AIs, you can get similar things, but they're really good with numbers when it comes to statistics. Programming, coding, and statistics, they're really good with that. And I teach statistics, so I can check all this. These p-values fall well below the 0.00. It's well below the 0.05, but it's also very low. It's well below the 0.001 threshold, which is an incredibly small alpha level of the test if you want to use something like that. That's way smaller than anything that's required for mainstream science. Demonstrating highly significant viewer agreement and making random chance a very unlikely explanation for the thematic overlap. So let's talk about the takeaway. What is a take-home message that you're to be getting from some of this? The cumulative from these Farsight projects, multiple Farsight projects. And do you see how I got this information? I took the transcripts, I uploaded them to ChatGPT, and then boom, I can ask questions about it and all this stuff comes out. So this allows me to say, when you're watching those projects, you're watching the real stuff, because these statistics are impossible to get if the stuff was fake. You can't believe mainstream media, but you can believe our projects, and we show you the proof, the statistical proof. And all of science is based on statistics. So those people who just say, and just dismiss it, either they're very badly informed or they're just stupid. Okay, and I'm talking about academics now. The cumulative pattern, is the takeaway, points to a prison planet governance model. This is what ChatGPT is drawing from these projects. That it's saying that there is a prison planet governance model driven by ET powers that use fear, psychological conditioning, symbolic violence, and theatrical encounters. Whatever it takes to sort of get people to obey. They used weaponized mythologies and religious narratives commonly. They use neurological and emotional manipulation. And they use targeted genetic, karmic, and ideological punishment. Now, then GPT concluded that these themes continue to echo into modern geopolitical and cultural structures, suggesting many resistance movements, truth embargoes, and disclosure efforts may be facing similar suppressive mechanisms adapted to a more modern form. So, do you see how valuable the vault is on farsight.org? You get into the vault and you say, should I really be watching all those video projects on farsightprime.com? Huh? And then you take the transcripts, which is literally word for word, every single word that was spoken under totally blind conditions, even the videos were recorded under totally blind conditions. Those transcripts, which has every single word spoken, is analyzed by the AIs, and these conclusions are the ones that you get. So those reinforcements of the basic message can be gotten not by you listening to somebody on the news who's not going to be giving you objective information anyway. They all have their biases. These conclusions are going to be gotten by you working with your own AI, looking at the original, raw, uninterpreted data. You're taking the data, you're putting it into your AI, and then you're getting this. So you're using perfectly collected, pristine data analyzed by an objective source, your own AI, to come up with this information. And this is not what you get in the mainstream, either in the mainstream university system or the mainstream news, or certainly not out of government. So this is how you actually can get the truth coming out. And we want you to be like from Missouri. Show me. Prove it to me. That's the so-called show me state. You're skeptical. It's okay to be skeptical. These are the data. And now you don't have to believe me. You can actually interact with your own AI that you're working with to come up with these things. So what we have right now is a continuation of that same prison planet hierarchy. The ETs are still there. And what what we call the bad ETs are still there. And what we have is an ability now through many of our projects for the curtain to be drawn back so that you can actually see what's really going on. So the FarsightPrime.com library is for your freedom. And we have to say that we at Farsight work with a group of ETs who are very big, called what we call the good ETs. And they have helped us put this Farsight vault together. So, we had to do it ourselves. We had to actually, but we were given sort of advice on what to do and how to proceed, but they didn't manipulate us in the sense of telepathically manipulating and getting us to do or say certain things. But we were motivated to do this type of project, and they gave us suggestions of how to do it. All types of suggestions, from camera equipment to buy to different projects to try, but we ended up doing them. And so that vault of video projects was really designed by the good ETs to allow that information to come out here on the planet. And there is no other source where you can get that type of information. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk to. I wanted to talk to you about that today, because the Seraphim is coming out tomorrow. And that's a project you just have to see. You have to see how blunt it is, and you have to understand that there's a huge difference between the type of mental manipulation you have today as compared with the type of mental manipulation that was possible back in the ancient days. In the ancient days, they did not have means to manipulate the masses through the media, governmental people, things like that. You had no media. So in today's age, you have media. And so you have to control the media, and so that's really what they do. They control the news sources, the media, and that's why there's such a resistance to disclosure, where you get people with Pentagon clearances actually testifying in front of Congress, and there's still resistance. No one will really accept it, because you have this tremendous amount of control from behind the scenes. And what we have seen with these projects, as well as right in front of us, is that the manipulation and control is always done in a way that you can't see it overtly. So when media is manipulated in such a way to dismiss certain things, you don't actually see the mechanism of the manipulation taking place. So it's done behind closed doors. The reptilians, for example, which are at the top of the food chain in terms of controlling the planet, they rarely do anything directly. They always work through proxies. That includes fighting battles, wars, things like that, but also mentally manipulating people. So it's always something where you really are in a situation where they say, what do you mean there's reptilians? We don't see any reptilians. That's the whole purpose. Yeah, they keep themselves hidden. But back in the old days, when you had things like the Seraphim, they didn't keep themselves hidden all the time. And they came out and they attacked people. And a lot of people died back in those days. And that's how the biblical references of the Seraphim actually came about. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. You got to see this new project called the Seraphim. It's coming out tomorrow. It's a big one. And by the way, we're upgrading all the types of stuff we do with videos. So the videos are getting increasingly, with every project, more and more interesting to watch. And you have no idea what's planned for like October. So much stuff is going to be coming out that we're going to be doing in ways that are technologically leaping ahead from anything you've ever type of seen before. So expect Farsight to be a very entertaining venue, but entertaining not with fantasy, but with truth, but mixed with technological ability to produce movie projects that are really stunning to watch. Okay, everybody, that was it. We had a great turnout today. And this is especially a great turnout given that we had technological problems and couldn't start on time, so we were starting a few minutes late. I appreciate everyone for doing that. And please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and remember to hit on that notifications bell. That's the only way you're notified about these live stream events and other projects. We never ever send out spam, and we never ever give our subscriber list to anybody else for any purpose whatsoever, period. We never add it to anybody's advertising anything, or, you know, it's we keep this totally separate, totally secret. And also, if you can go to the farsightprime.com, we truly appreciate all of those who are subscribers. You are the ones who make all of this possible, and those projects are stuff that you really want to see. And I will see you next week. Remember, I'm going to be coming out every single week on Sunday, and I will see you next Sunday, all right? All right, everybody. Be there, be square.